Now is the time that we should be legalizing cannabis and making medicinal cannabis available to those who need it, not at a cost of over $1,000 a month. That is ridiculous. If we want to minimize the harm associated with drug use, we should treat it as a health issue, because that's what it is, not a criminal issue. Looking at the National Party members sitting in the House right now, you'd think that they hadn't realized the Law Commission delivered a report on this very issue nearly 7 years ago, recommending a fundamental change to our drug laws, that we treat it as a health issue, not a criminal issue. Criminalizing cannabis has not stopped it from being widely used. It just creates more harm by making people criminals. It's ridiculous. The New Zealand Drug Foundation estimates that between 2007 and 2011, just 4 years, we spent $60 million imprisoning people for minor drug convictions. And what happens after that? How are those people supposed to turn their lives around after spending that time in prison? That doesn't even include the amount of money that was spent on the police, on the courts, on everything else. $15 million a year could go a long way to helping people with drug issues. And the last thing we should be doing is locking up people for minor offenses when the activity they are engaging in doesn't even cause harm to themselves or anyone else. Now, I know it comes as a huge surprise to National Party members sitting opposite, but these laws were never evidence-based in the first place. You go back in the 1930s, medicinal cannabis was being prescribed by doctors in New Zealand. It was actually international pressure pushed by completely uninformed bureaucrats, very ideologically driven bureaucrats from the United States, that forced New Zealand to change the law and impose the drug law we have today, which is horribly, horribly out of date. Now, I know the Green Party is usually a little too far ahead of its time, and certainly way ahead of this national government. The reality is the evidence has shown we were right about climate change. The evidence has shown we were right about a capital gains tax when we argued for it in 2002. The evidence has shown we were right about public transport, and now pretty much everyone, even the people voting for the National Party, understand that the only way to solve Auckland's transport problems is to invest in public transport. And above all, evidence has shown that the Green Party was right about drug law reform. And we have been leading on cannabis law reform for a quarter of a century now. And yeah, a few decades ago, people were laughing about it. But now look who's out of date. New Zealand is decades behind other jurisdictions who are demonstrating that treating drug abuse and use as a health issue is far more effective at reducing the harms associated with it. Nearly half the states in the United States, and more than half the population, live in states where medicinal cannabis is now legal or cannabis itself is legal for recreational use. Portugal has taken a completely health-based approach to regulating drugs, and I have to commend the Honourable Peter Dunn for recommending that we adopt that same approach here in New Zealand. It's really unfortunate that 15 years ago, the Honourable Peter Dunn, as part of his supply and confidence agreement, actually blocked progress on drug law reform, which many people had been advocating for. But I'm happy to say 15 years later, now that he's the minister responsible, he's seen the evidence, he is trying to get this government to take some baby steps in the direction of an approach that would actually help New Zealanders. But it's not good enough. The minuscule moves in this direction are not going to help the very sick New Zealanders who could really benefit from being able to use cannabis to relieve their pain or their nausea or to help with sleeping. And the reality is, the evidence shows that cannabis has very low side effects, much lower than the opiate-based pain relief that they're being prescribed. And yet the medicinal cannabis products that are available to them cost over $1,000 a month. This shows that cannabis has far lower chance of dependency and risk of side effects than many other substances which are legal. The Green Party will continue to lead on this issue, and we will make drug law reform a priority because we know it will benefit all New Zealanders. It is time to legalize cannabis. Thank you, Mr. Speaker.